proud for. So, Christiane Frischmuth, welcome to Humans of Gestalt, and welcome to the conversation we're having today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, tell us what is your name and where are you today?
So my name is Christiane Frischmuth, and today I am in Ridgway, Colorado, United States.
So, who are you as a person? This can be speaking to your interests, your passions, your qualities, your, just how you experience yourself, who you are.
I think I always tend to first go with that question to all the different loves and roles I have. I'm a daughter. My parents are still alive, both. I'm a sister. I'm a owner of a company. I am a very dedicated volunteer preserving wilderness. I'm an absolute lover of being outdoors. I just turned 60, so I am definitely eldering, whatever that means at different phases of life. I'm a dual citizen, German and American. I feel like I feel very German. I think culturally, the older I get, and I've lived all over the world, so I have benefited from all the different cultures I've lived in. And when I look back over my life, I feel so grateful that I was able to have all those experiences. Let's see, what else comes to mind? I think I'm a very loyal friend, and absolutely love traveling. So I think I'm also a pioneer and very curious and quite adventurous. And the older I get, I think the more comfortable I am with boredom, quietness, and doing nothing. So that's what comes to mind with your question.
Good number of things come up there. Thank you for sharing that. What do you see as your core values, and how do you hold them in your life?
Yeah, I think the first one that really comes to mind is loyalty. And relationship. And I really think that's a red, like a thread that has gone through my life. I would always put relationships and visiting people and standing by people over almost anything else. Yeah, so that definitely I would say is innermost core. Responsibility in my relationships and in my roles. There's both a shadow and a sunny side to that, of course. Inclusivity. I seem to remember from a very early age being absolutely distraught when people would not be included, or when somebody would be made to feel they're on the outside. And so I have a little bit of that mantle of defender of the excluded. I really watch out for that, and I would go to bat for them. I think including myself, that's definitely something that can trigger me, that aspect for others and myself. Yeah, I think those three come to mind for me at this point. I'm sure there are others, but those kind of came up right away with my belly roaring for it.
Yeah, that's often a good place to pay attention to, right? As in terms of getting information about what matters to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so Christiana, what event or set of circumstances has shaped or impacted who you are? And how did it do so?
Well, probably the first one is I grew up in a small farming village, and I feel I have that real deeply grounded sense of belonging to a tribe, to a network of quite expanded family. Um, I've done quite a few generational pieces of work, and I always feel there's a long line of people who have my back, standing behind me. Like I feel very solid about that. And very solidly on the earth, on the ground. That's, farming, earth, soil, forests. I belong to that world very solidly. I probably spent my first, I would say, 12 years, barefoot all summer long. So that natural world is also part of it. And then I would say going to an international school was another event that really shaped my path, because that got me started on international work, being very curious about other cultures, really feeling at home in other cultures and wanting to be exposed to them, and I think feeling comfortable being in a minority, not assuming there's anything to be feared about that. And that curiosity that comes with differentness. That's not a word, but people being different. What else was formative after that? I decided to travel. I backpacked around the world for 2 years, and that has been a continuity in my life. There's nothing more wonderful for me than to get rid of all my possessions, have a backpack on my back, and just go without a very definitive plan. In fact, a few years ago, when I sold my home in DC and moved to Colorado, I really wasn't sure. Would I go to a new place or would I just go? And it was I had to really think about that, because that's so much in my blood. I wonder if I had some nomads, way down or not too far down in my family line. And then I think something else which we both have in common is I got exposed to Gestalt in various institutes, and for many years did a lot of training in the Gestalt approach. And I think that professionally has shaped me. And I also think gave me quite a bit of confidence in who I am, and feeling comfortable in my own skin. Yeah, I would say those are sort of the significant ones.
You mentioned some of the earlier ones, like growing up on a farm and being surrounded by nature and being in nature, and then attending an international school. To what extent do those things still show up for you today? That you see how they're impacting how you are today in the world?
The international aspect for sure, because I work primarily internationally and feel very comfortable. And in fact, I miss it. I haven't been on an international work trip in a while. So that part is just feeding my soul, and really has been, I would say, 80% or even more at times of my work life. And nature continues to be, probably the primary aspect in my life after relationships. I just spent so much time outdoors. That was a reason for my move. I developed a nature coaching program. I try to build nature into my work as much as I can. And clients respond to it. I have quite a few coaching clients who selected me because of that aspect in my bio. And I think during COVID, a lot of people found nature to be very healing and easily accessible. And I think it's become more a part of our world than perhaps it was before, like an acceptable, acknowledged aspect. So yeah, that has never waned. That's always been a big part. And I've made it a bigger part. Nature, I've made a bigger part of my life for the last few years because I moved into the mountains deliberately.
Right. That's interesting. So moving from sort of events to people,
Mm-hmm.
who's had the most impact on who you are as a human being? And how did that come about?
Definitely family members. Parents, of course, have shaped me for better and worse. My embracing and resistance to them, again, for better and worse. I would say my grandma, who's not alive anymore, really has had a big like mothering solidity aspect. My brother continues, I call him my coach because he's so different from me. And I love watching him and learning from him. And I also notice what I find harder to accept. So I'm really aware of that aspect. And we don't live together, so it's easy to with that distance to be both accepting and have a bit of a perspective on that. When I was I would say when I was working at the World Bank, there were some people, colleagues, and managers who I observed in terms of how they were leading and managing others and how they interacted with clients. And that had a huge impact on me, like as role models, positive role models, emulating them and just noticing how I felt in their presence and being managed and led by them. And I would use that to see how did I feel in the presence of others, and how was that difference, and how was the impact, and also trying to observe how people felt in my presence, and how was that the same or different. I'm trying to think if they were teachers. Yeah, there certainly were some Gestalt practitioners who had a huge impact on me. My personal development, just the feedback they gave me and the work that they did, personal development work they did with me as part of the programs. And then I have some dear friends who I've, had friendships with for decades. And, we've had our ups and downs. And I think the aspect of honesty and also breaks in relationships and then mending them and having an even stronger relationship than before, that's had a huge impact. There is a certain, there's safety in knowing that you can recover from it, or you can actually build relationship based on that honesty, and they grow stronger. Yeah, so those would come to mind for me.
It's interesting. I'm just, noticing in how you're talking about people who've impacted on you, but also circumstances that have shaped you. You're not limiting yourself to just one of each. And I'm appreciating the kind of plurality of life experience and people that are part of you, that have shaped you.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe one thing, as you said that I would add is when I was living overseas, I believe it was an incredibly immersive learning about how I held power and privilege, and how I different situations. And of course, as I got older and had more of a looking back perspective, there were definitely moments where I was like, oh my God, oh my goodness, what was I doing? I was either unaware or even reveling in that you know, young person's power all of a sudden. And I definitely think I was abusive at times of that power and privilege, you know. So I think I learned a lot also from being in those situations, and then having people help me reflect on those and how I held those. And I think if I hadn't lived in those circumstances, I might not have had that jolting awareness, you know, oh my goodness, that's how I did it. And this is what the impact was. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you've just mentioned that, because I was going to ask about privilege and power. So how do you experience privilege and power in your life?
The primary thoughts are, you know, continuing what I said earlier, how there is such, how shall I say, like the ripples of the unawareness of power and privilege are so, you know, manifold, and they're manifest in so many different ways. Like I was thinking of being a young white woman in Africa, where I was often the minority, but still held the most power in the room, not knowing, you know. And if I had been in Germany as a young woman, I would have never had that same privilege. And people not telling me how I impacted them, because they were, I don't know if they were necessarily worried about the impact, but they could have been, because, you know, I represented purse strings. But they were probably so incredibly polite that they just, you know, wouldn't have told me how I came across. So I, especially when I still travel internationally, or when I am in the presence of people who are not from the same culture that I am, I do think I hold that awareness still. What I still find difficult is to, not having been born in the US, to feel really into the racial and power and privilege aspects in the US, given the US history of, you know, of slavery and continued difference in power in all the many ways that it shows up. I remember my very first workshop in the US, what was it called? Something around diversity. It was with, not with a Gestalt organization, but another one. And having just come from Africa and saying things that were really jolting to some of the African-American participants in the course, who saw me as a white woman representative, and just being shocked at what I had done and said had, you know, evoked or provoked, to the point where they would not talk to me anymore, and I didn't know how to recover from that. And so I still feel that in the US, there are more landmines for me, I feel, than when I'm in Africa, for example, or in other places. I feel more at home there, you know, even instinctively or from my heart, than in the US. I always feel a little unsure how to tread.
That's interesting. I mean, I've had some similar experiences, and it just makes me think about, you know, the things we learn, particularly as children.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of consider that normal, right? And then we move to other places and have different experiences. It always feels, not always, but it can often feel still like it's not quite fully comfortable with that. It always, there's a bit of a dissonance that remains present even after many years.
Yeah.
Do you find that as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I think absolutely, when you grow up in a culture, you know, that's the primary imprinting. I think by going outside of the culture, you certainly are able to look at it, you know, it's fish swimming in water. And so I'm much more aware, I think, of the German culture and how it shows up in me, because I've been outside of it, but that's clearly embedded in me very much. Yeah. And I come also from a generation, the post-war generation. So I think we did a lot of thinking and discussing about German culture, German culture, you know, the role of the Germans in the world, the shame, the guilt, the continued power and privilege, you know, how it shows up in Germany. So I think there was a lot of that unpacking when I was growing up. And of course, I don't know how much of that happened in the US because I didn't get here until, you know, college. So I don't know how much happened. And even if it had happened, I wasn't part of it. Yeah.
So we've been talking a little bit about some of your experience of being a white person in the world, living in Africa, now living in Germany and in the United States. I'm curious about, how do you experience and understand your gender?
I would say so the first jolting was, I would say, when I went to my international school. I had really not thought very much about the difference between boys and girls. And, you know, I grew up in a very liberal, anti-authoritarian family, society. I didn't have a sense that I couldn't do things that my brother could do. The only thing was probably when I had my first boyfriend, my parents were very worried about my spending the night. Whereas by the time my brother had reached my age, they dealt with it differently. So there definitely was a difference. Could be because I'm the older one, but I think there also is a difference the way parents probably relate. But apart from that, I really didn't have a sense of that difference of possibility. And then I went to an international school and was exposed to different cultures who held male, female, men, women very differently. And I was astonished. I rebelled. I couldn't understand it. And so that was my first realization, unaccepting realization, you know. You don't want me to go into a boy's room? Why that? You want me to, you know, be in bed by 10 o'clock? Why that? Well, if you have multiple cultures, in order to be safe, there have to be certain rules because we all were with our parents. So I think that was the first one. And then, yeah, living overseas, I did notice in some of the cultures that I was definitely treated differently because I was a woman. You know, I think being a white woman, I fell out of the typical what women are supposed to wear and be and do professionally. But I think I definitely was treated differently than men, both by the German colleagues as well as by African or Asian colleagues, which is where I lived. Nowadays, there's something about getting older. I feel like I'm embracing all the aspects of being a woman, and I'm actually very much delighting in it. I love seeing younger women embrace the wildness. You know, I love when women say, you know, I'm a witch, which when I grew up was definitely a curse word or a word to be not, you know, you don't want to be called that. And now it has a different connotation. So I'm really delighting in the way womanhood is held nowadays.
So I'm curious. You kind of just spoke about how you're delighting and seeing how younger women are embracing different ways of understanding and experiencing their gender. Do you find that they also are an inspiration to you to kind of how you might expand and broaden your experience? You know, so in a sense that like that idea of like reverse mentoring in a sense, right? That they're blazing a path now that you're happy to go along as well.
Yeah, I would say what comes to mind immediately is body image. And I mean that, I mean, there's always a positive and a negative. You know, I'm sure social media creates all sorts of horrible scenarios you know, where young women, have to really struggle with that. I'm thinking about also the positive aspect, my younger second cousins or children of second cousins, they are so confident about, their body. And when I grew up, there was definitely this aspect of how do you dress, are you overweight or not? Are you sporty or not? There were all these aspects, and I see quite a bit of confidence. Like I remember my mom said something to someone in one of my young relatives, about a little jab at, you could stand to lose some weight, not in the same words, but it was clear. And she's like, well, that's your problem, saying to my mom. And I'm like, bingo, wow, I wish I had been like that when I was your age. So that's a big learning for me, because I cherish young women being that way. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna take that on for sure. I would say that's probably the one that I've had the most direct experience with. I would say in the workplace and in my coaching clients, unfortunately, I haven't seen that much change in the workplace. I still feel the same issues coming up for women in the workplace as were, when I started coaching 20, 30 years ago. That I feel not that much has changed, actually.
Well, let's kind of talk about another aspect of your experience. And you spoke about feeling, I think you described it as sort of enjoying the age you are and your experience of your gender. So I'm curious a little bit about your experience, how you're experiencing your age and the aging process.
Oh,
what's that?
Well, it's tough, I would say, because I'm starting to feel some physical limitations creeping in. And that's just tough to be with, because I never had to think about it. I felt like I was physically almost, there were no limits. I mean, I set myself limits. I didn't want to climb Mount Everest ever. And now there are limits. And I have to make those limits and working with those my day job. I can't just dismiss them. So that I find, as that is creeping in, just have to pay a lot more attention with it. And I wish it weren't so, but it is. And seeing my parents, it's not going to get better. It's something to really, be with and deal with. I find it's such a relief to be at a phase of my life where I don't worry anymore about my career or about my business or about my job. I feel like I get to make the choices. I just feel much more calm and relaxed. I don't think I give my power away as I used to in the beginning of my career, when I was feeling I had to do anything to keep a client. I feel I listen a lot more, when I have that little anxiety about, am I providing value to a client? I used to do all the work, and now I remind myself, your primary job is to listen. It's okay to pause. I just find it to be very relaxing to get older. I have not had a negative experience of being older in the workplace. I have to say, though, also that almost all my work now is virtual. And so some of the experience I hear about, women dyeing their hair, not necessarily because they like how they look that way, but because they feel a gray-haired woman would be seen as over the hill. So I feel being online also gives me a lot of freedom. I don't know if I would have had more experiences if I still was standing in front of groups a lot, Yeah, and I can't really say if the world is changing around that. When I speak with my female colleagues, I think we all are feeling, oh my God, we wouldn't trade our current age for anything. Yeah, but I do hear murmurs of that women have a harder time professionally as we age and being seen still as relevant versus men, but I don't have a direct experience of that myself.
Thank you for sharing these things. I'd like to turn to your experience with Gestalt.
Mm-hmm.
So, Christiane, how did you come upon Gestalt practice?
It was a bit of a roundabout way. I was living in Africa and felt isolated in terms of my personal development and professional training. There was very little offered in exchange. And so when I came back to the States, a good friend mentioned to me the National Training Laboratory, NTL. And so I took some courses when I was on home leave. And one of the faculty had just gone through the Becoming a Better Intervener program at the Gestalt Institute in Cleveland. And so that was sort of up there for me as, wow, it made such a difference for her. And that's when I started, when I moved back to the States, I decided to go and join that program. And that was my start of the Gestalt journey. We were the first program after 9/11. In fact, our program got postponed by 3 months because we would have started right around then. And of course, that changed everything. So I still remember that. But that was the start of my Gestalt journey.
So that was 2001.
That was, I think it was supposed to start September 2001, and we started, I think, December, something like that.
All right. So from today's perspective, that's well, just a bit more than 20 years ago, 22 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what attracted you, or what are you most attracted to in Gestalt practice and Gestalt theory as well?
Mm-hmm. I would say on the so I've experienced both the more personal development therapy track, I would say, as well as the organizational track, which are slightly different, right? One is a very systemic perspective. The other one is more the person as a system. So on the organizational side, I was just floored by the ability to observe a system and make interventions in such a way that they really had an impact. And you scan yourself as well as being able to observe the system and the patterns, and then really thinking about what do you say, who do you say it to, which aspect of the system, and what do you say? Just that whole, the art and science of interventions, I just thought was incredible. The first time I saw this, I thought all the faculty were magicians. I was like, oh my God, how do they do that? So I would say that's something I've never forgotten, and I really have taken away and still think about very, very often. I like the organic nature, the figure ground aspect, which happens all the time in life. And I'll never forget also how one of the faculty said, when you're working with clients, don't worry if you miss something, it'll come around again. And I think that's such a, being rooted in real life way of seeing things, and also not taking ourselves too seriously as interveners. Right? It'll come around again. And if it's not you, then somebody will pick it up. I think I have internalized the cycle of experience, even though I don't use it necessarily as a model that I might necessarily share with clients. But I give myself more and more time, also as I get older, to have that sensation awareness aspect really come and really be grounded. And I think I look inside of me and trust my intuition and my gut and my heart so much more than my brain and immediately trying to do something. So I think as I get older, the cycle maybe takes longer, but I feel it's more grounded in my whole being. Levels of system, absolutely so important. And I think Gestalt really made that so practicable for me. And then on the therapy side, I have to say that when I went through some of the programs, I thought the level of open-heartedness and empathy and love that the faculty and practitioners had for us as their clients was incredible. Really incredible. And I really took that away from that experience. I did programs in physical process, and also intervening with one person. As part of a program, we also learned how to co-facilitate with somebody else to hold a group. And that partnership was so different from other partnerships. And I think in Gestalt, we really learned that, how to be partners and co-interveners and do it openly, transparently in front of a group, which is such a relief that you can just put everything transparently out there and the group will learn from that as much as, you know, from what you might do with one participant. So, yeah, so you can see, you know, like really that organic bringing the full self and the full heartedness and the love for the client, that was so deeply impactful for me.
So I'm curious that you've brought together both this kind of organizational part of Gestalt practice as well as the more personal, so the therapy side of it, and even talking somatic learnings and experiences. So how would you say Gestalt has affected you as a person?
I wouldn't be the practitioner I am today without the experience I had as a person and as a professional in the Gestalt program. I still remember coming back to my then primary workplace after each of the modules. The modules were, I can't remember, 5 or 6 days, and I think there were 5 or 6 of them. And every time I came back, my colleagues and managers would say, wow, you've changed. You have, you know, I can't remember what exactly they said, but they said it in a positive way. You know, either the way I was confident or the way I'm holding myself, or maybe there was more of a sense of I knew what I was doing or less anxious, but they could even see the difference. So yeah, really important to me. What I also remember is some of the personal development aspects of some of the Gestalt programs. The difficulty of work that wasn't complete in the program and then coming home and having a hard time finding support, you know, because the churning continues inside. And that was something I really took away. How can you help a client, how should I say, not fall apart or not be able to complete work to such a degree that they can function when they go back and not feel unincorporated, you know, like they just couldn't hold it, or they were frazzled, or they didn't know how to support themselves till the next time. And I think that's our responsibility. And because I had some not very good experiences of feeling left alone and really not knowing how to keep going with what had been churned up, that's something that I keep really paying attention to in all the work that I do, to the point where I've actually had altercations with colleagues who I felt were not handling some of this very responsibly. And you could see some clients visibly shaken, but then left alone. And that I feel is not a very responsible way to hold our work.
Mm, mm. So you're sort of weaving back and forth between your personal experiences and how it's impacted on you personally, and the work that you do, and how, you know, your personal development informs and influences your practice. So speak a little bit about what you see as the essence of your practice. What's the work that you do that draws on Gestalt?
I coach at the moment. That's my primary primary aspect of my practice, of my business. I think my whole life, I feel my primary purpose is to work myself out of a job. So I know I've done a good job when my clients say, you know, thank you, I'm done. For the right reasons, not because they hate me or because they don't have money anymore, or because they got fired, or, you know, they got divorced or something, but really because they feel they're complete and they can now go forward without any other support from my side. So I really think that's my primary job, whether it was living overseas, you know, working on agricultural projects, or doing team coaching or individual coaching, supporting people in such a way that they have the experience and wherewithal and practices and inner strength to, you know, continue on their life path with more clarity and self-assuredness as well. I know who I am. I know what my gifts are. I can bring it to the world, and I'm okay the way I am. I'm better than okay. You know, if I didn't exist, something would be missing in the world, and I know how to bring it forth.
Mm, mm. So I'm personally more familiar with the kind of the organizational and group, you know, part of Gestalt work, but I think what you've just said, I suspect that people doing therapy from a Gestalt approach as well as organizational work would all sign on to. You know, that what we seek to do as practitioners is to support people so that they're better when we leave them, and that you know that they are sort of well launched and aren't maintaining a form of dependence upon their support uh, to cope in the world, right? You know, you
Yeah, and
spoke about them like being even better, you know, even better than good.
yeah, and sometimes it can be being an ally and having the experience of what is it like to have somebody stand shoulder to shoulder with you and support, you know, you as the client and you in the driver's seat, or an experience of absolute agency. You know, even if they were not to walk away with particular tools or practices, but maybe an experience that they hadn't had before, and now they know what it's like and know how to look for it or generate it. You know, or maybe some different behaviors uh, of how to deal with, I don't know, a difficult conversation the next time. But I've heard from a lot of my coaching clients that what is often more valuable than a specific tool is an experience that they feel in their bones that they maybe haven't had before, or couldn't describe before, or didn't know how to ask for. Or to get, right? There's that pulling, there's that grabbing, there's that taking. And many of us don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or we hold so tightly, we don't know how to let it go. It you know, could be any of that. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, let me kind of probe this element a little bit further, because you were sort of talking about the upsides, the benefits that people experience in working with a Gestalt practitioner, working with yourself, and some of the um, limitations or the constraints on good practice. What for you have been some of your more challenging moments as related to Gestalt practice?
I don't know if this is only Gestalt practice. However, it happened within a Gestalt program. And I think if you go for a longer program where you get to know people and there's such a depth of personal development, I would say triggers can happen maybe more readily, or people might give you feedback more readily than if you just see somebody for a day. So I would say triggering somebody else unawares and getting feedback about that and being really just devastated by feedback because it hit my trigger, oh my goodness, they stopped loving me, or oh my God, they don't like me anymore, or oh my God, my reputation is going to be shot because they will say we will never work with this woman again. And so quite a few of those happened during a Gestalt program, and I'm grateful now that they happened. I think sometimes they were held well in a supportive way, that I felt the person I could work through it and came out on the other end with more understanding and love for each other, and we're able to translate it to the wider system or how to deal with it in the future. And sometimes it was not, sometimes I felt I was quite left alone with it and didn't quite know what to do next. So again, I don't think that's very specific about a Gestalt program, but it happened.
It reminds me of what you were saying a little bit earlier when you were talking about your learning program and having sometimes that sense of not quite completion, not closure,
Yeah.
and coming back to the workplace, and that was feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So,
Yeah.
what I'm just hearing in it is this piece that Gestalt seeks to do around the importance of endings, the importance of closure. And I think, you're just speaking to what it feels like, what the experience is when that doesn't happen very well.
Yeah, especially with a program that goes for a longer time where more depth could be unveiled, right? Or yes. I have to say that in my work, I'm also a wilderness guide and take people out into nature where sometimes also very deeply held fears or challenges can come out. And this aspect of incorporation, right? How are you able to close, complete, get something into your bones, are able to function when you go back to an environment that hasn't changed, that doesn't know that you've changed, that expects you to be the old person, or you come back with a different language or with experiences you don't want to share, or you're worried that if you share it'll be taken wrongly. I think that's not particular to Gestalt, but I think any program has the responsibility and the difficulty of how do you provide support when people go back home, and you don't always, it's sometimes people say, go find a therapist or go find a coach. Well, that's not always the solution, or it's not the right solution, or it's not as easy. So yeah, so this aspect of incorporation, of closing, of ending, of allowing people to go away from a program and be functional back in the place that they've come from. What else were challenging moments in my Gestalt programs? I would say the larger system, when it's not about you and me relationally, and we of course bring the system to us, but it's the larger systemic conversation, white people and African-American people, and how do we show up in a system, and how do we have a conversation about that? Men, women, old, young. I remember some of the programs, whenever it became a whole system in the room conversation, it's almost nobody knew how to do that. It always felt unsatisfied, not satisfying, or we kept, kind of staying in the same place. I think that was very challenging, and that reminded me also of, our world nowadays and how hard it is to speak to a system, or as a system, or from a system.
Especially when you're in the system and part of the system yourself, right? it strikes me, I'm just thinking about this, that if one's a therapist or a consultant or a coach, you've got this privilege of entering somebody else in their system and trying to support them. But when you are yourself a member of that system, you know, what are you aware of already? What blind spots do you have? And how do you help yourself and others, you know, face things and have good dialogue, do good work around that?
Yeah, and you know what that reminds me of, this distinction between intimate and strategic, right? When you are one-on-one, it's a more intimate system. And so even if something's triggered, or if we were to have a confrontational, situation, it's between us. It doesn't feel as vulnerable, as exposing. But when you are in a big group, and you have I'm part of one system, and other people are part of another system, and we are exposing it, it feels so much more vulnerable. I think, so things might be revealed to a larger group of people, and place. And I think in general, when we are in a larger system, we tend to be much more strategic.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're more adept, and we're trying more to hide the more vulnerable aspects of ourselves. But especially in a Gestalt program, we tend to reveal those, but it doesn't always feel comfortable. And we're like, oh, I should have been more strategic. And then the fear of, well, what does that mean? How will people now see me in the future? So there is definitely the threat of exposure, which is much higher in a larger system than when you're just one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us experience that during some of those programs, and how to deal with that. You have to really trust and know how to hold that.
Right. And it also strikes me that there's perhaps a little bit of an assumption in what you're talking about, where when you as a learner, as a participant, are facing these challenging situations, so an assumption that the faculty have done their work so that they're able to show up in a supportive manner, that they're not facing these things for the first time with you, so that they're able to bring some perspective and, not be shocked, not be surprised, but be with you and, not lead you through it, but hold the space so that you're supported in doing that difficult work.
Yeah, and thinking of myself as faculty, it certainly is easier when you're not triggered yourself. So for sure, not doing it the first time. And also, as much as possible, either having done your work, or when you get triggered, knowing how you can still hold the group and not be in your own work, which is not always easy. But I think, yeah, it requires a lot from us as faculty, or from whoever the faculty is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, what I'm feeling also is that the sense of one's never done with learning as a Gestalt practitioner, right? And it's not just about honing intervention skills or observing skills, but also that work on yourself to keep sharpening yourself around how you show up. And, knowing the power of your presence. And so really, always being attentive to that.
And how some of the most powerful moments can be when you are as vulnerable with the participants as you expect them to be with you, right? Which I think also levels the playing field when it shows up. It's not a requirement, but when it shows up. Yeah.
Well, you were talking about some of your learning in groups. So the different angle on that is being part of a community, right? Not coming together for the purpose of to learn something, but being a community together. Do you feel like you're part of a Gestalt community?
I do, because I'm part of a group that meets regularly, and that keeps Gestalt fresh for me, and also continues to build the personal relationships of a group of Gestalt practitioners. I probably felt more steeped in Gestalt when I was actively taking programs and when I was involved for many years with various institutions, which I'm not anymore at the moment. So the primary aspect is really the group I'm a part of. However, now that you ask me, there is this sort of sense of I'm part of a global Gestalt community, and if I wanted to, I could access it easily if I wanted to. Yeah, it's not as part of my world anymore as it used to be, but I have an awareness that I'm part of a global network of Gestalt practitioners. Yeah.
Yeah, good, interesting. So, Christiane, coming to a kind of a final question for you. What's next for you, and what do you see as perhaps being next for Gestalt practice, if you have any thoughts about that?
It's not very clear in my mind, but sort of the first thing that comes up, handing over to the next generation and to have that done however well it can be done. But, you know, we're both, you and I are definitely sort of not the youngest generation. And so how are new people being brought into Gestalt, and how are they using it, and what are their issues, and what are their ways of how they're holding it, and how do we make space for them? It's sort of I think it's a job of every generation to do that for the next one. And since I'm not as involved in programs, I don't quite know how that is, what the thoughts are. If it's just an organic process, or if there is a real bringing on board of practitioners. But that's really very much in my mind, everywhere in my world at the moment. How are we handing over to making space for allowing people to grab or make space themselves, the next generations? And probably also the issues that young people face nowadays that we didn't have to face when we were, you know, in mid-career.
Right. Well, so it's interesting because, I mean, sorry for interrupting you, but I'm sort of linking this back to what you were saying in response to the question about how you experience your gender, right? And we spoke there about the sort of welcoming that I heard from you of younger women and their different ways of doing things, their different sense of themselves, and how that's also a gift for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I'm hearing in a similar manner is this sort of this handing over of, I'm not sure what is being handed over, but in sort of in inviting younger generations, right, to join in Gestalt and to join in the teaching and the promotion of Gestalt. What I'm hearing from you is it's not simply about receive the wisdom and do it in this way, because that's how we do it, but more we're handing over and inviting you to refresh it, rejuvenate it, make it relevant for what people are grappling with today.
Absolutely. And I think that also then changes maybe our understanding of what our role is as we are, you know, getting older. It doesn't mean sitting back or stepping out, or, you know, we keep our seat at the table, but maybe we have a slightly different orientation. You know, maybe before it was like this and now it's more like this, you know, or I just have such an awareness at the moment of how my place in the world is shifting as I'm getting older, you know, as I'm more of an older woman or eldering women. And what's my role now? What's my job now? You know, how do I relate now to the to those who come next? And I think it's different than when, my grandparents, I remember, the older people would pretty much literally sit next to the fireplace and take care of the grandchildren because they couldn't physically do the farm work anymore. Well, I'm not doing farm work, so it's not the same, but there is a shifting, there's a different way of holding what you're doing or being. And then what's next for me is really paying attention to how I show up for my family and how that's really becoming a priority. And for quite a few years now, I have really been trusting my intuition and really reaffirming my gut and my heart over my mind. I mean, I don't neglect my mind, but to really give that a lot of credence. And so I think I will know. But to keep doing what feels right and stop doing what doesn't feel right. And a little bit quicker decision-making cycles.
Well, there's always space for more learning, right? We're never done.
Exactly. If it doesn't feel right, stop it. And if it was too soon, start it again, rather than wait too long or vice versa. So, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, Christiane, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you for joining me in this conversation and being part of the Humans of Gestalt initiative. It's been wonderful hearing from you, your story and your insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the wonderful questions.